All right, everybody that's here, well, everybody else come in as they come. I'm going to get started. Welcome to my class it's called the Next Real Estate Gold Rush. It's really my background and what I've done to buy a significant amount of Airbnb properties or short-term rental properties over the last few years. And I'd like to share where I failed, where I've succeeded, and how I've kind of put it together, and hopefully how you guys can do it next, or convert something you have, or continue to grow your Airbnb portfolio. Um, I'm in mortgages since 2001, late 2001. So I've been in the business for over 20 years now at this point, which sounds a little crazy, but it's over 20 years. And I have been buying property since 2002. So now I've actually been buying properties for over 20 years too. And my first run in buying properties didn't end so well in 2008. I bought a bunch of properties that some I kept and some I lost in the market crash. And I didn't have the best strategies at the beginning of this. So when I restarted again in 2008, and I completely restarted, I was left over with a couple of properties from pre-market crash, but I basically completely started over. And when I started over, I went into more of a safe real estate investing strategy, which I still believe in today, and I still have some of my portfolio in smaller multifamily investing. And I mean by small multifamily is anything between 2 and 4 or 5 families. That's a safe long-term investment. And what you're really looking for there is above a break even on your rent every single month, and you gain equity over time. And those are very, very good long-term investments. But what I was finding from my investment in multifamily homes is that you can't, it's very, very hard to take the money you're making on those properties and buy other properties unless you take the equity out of your home. So, as 2018, 2019 rolled around, and we went into COVID and everything else, I started looking for a different strategy, and I really wanted to check out what Airbnb was and how I could, kind of make a go of that. So that's where my journey started here. And I just want to talk a little bit about what the platforms look like and what that means as far as what we're looking at with these type of. I'm going to go right here. I just don't want to freeze it. So Airbnb, I'm going to talk about Airbnb in general right now. Airbnb is now a publicly traded company as of December 2020. And it showed basically gross revenues in June of about 1.35 billion. That number right now is about 1.6 or 1.7 billion, which doesn't mean anything to us. But what had happened is that it had really grown up until COVID pandemic, and then it crashed a little bit, and then it grew significantly after the pandemic. A lot of people were kind of moving around the country. And besides Airbnb and VRBO, we have seen other major travel websites, which is part of my strategy. The thing I like about short-term rental property owning is that it's not just Airbnb and VRBO. We use for our 12 properties that we're renting right now via short-term rental. We use VRBO, Airbnb, Booking.com, Expedia. We use something called Peerspace, which I'll get into later, and we also use a couple of long-term rental websites where people rent stuff for over 30 days, like Furnished Finders. So I'll talk a little bit more in detail about that stuff later, but that's good stuff for you guys to take down. Everything on the screen, plus Peerspace, plus Furnished Finders is really, really are good short-term rental websites if you're looking to rent your property. So that's what we're really using. So I'm not pigeonholed into just Airbnb, but Airbnb, based off the current numbers, is still about 75% of the short-term rental market for the country, not for me, but for the country. So most of the renting is still being done through Airbnb. So they're still the biggest, baddest person in the room. What they've changed recently is that their website is based on a few different things, and I'm going to give you just a small criteria of what makes your listing go or not go at this point. But it's kind of just like social media, right? Your pictures are very, very important. And like Zillow or other websites like that, or Yelp, your reviews are the next important thing. So if you have good pictures and you have good reviews, your property will show up higher on the algorithm on these websites, meaning that'll show up more often for people that are going to search in towns. You may put your property up on a platform and go look for it, and you can't find it on the 5th, 6th, and 7th page. Usually you need reviews. And with Airbnb specifically, and they have some pretty stringent rules, but becoming a superhost is important on that platform. And you don't have to have 1 million properties to become a superhost. You just have to have a certain amount of reviews, good reviews. They track your response time, meaning how fast and how often you respond. And they track your amount of cancellations. So you're essentially not able to cancel people's reservations if you're on the Airbnb platform. You're allowed like 2 or 3 a year, and that's it. And then it starts to affect your rating. So they're really guest friendly, but over the last, I would say 6 to 12 months, they've gotten more owner friendly, where they have offered more insurance to owners, and they're offering better tools for owners on their platform. So they're getting a little bit better towards this side, but they're very, very guest friendly when it comes to that, just like a hotel would be. And by the way, any questions you guys have, save them towards the end, and then I'll get to everybody's questions. If something is urgent and you're afraid that I'm going to get away from it, just throw it in the chat and I'll try to answer them as I go. So the way I choose whether I'm going to rent a property as a short-term rental or a long-term rental is really based on what my time is available, right? So I just want to kind of talk to you about the differences between them. And the thing I'm going to look to when a long-term rental, and when I mean long-term rental, I mean anything over 1-year leases. So anything over a 1-year lease or a 1-year lease is considered a long-term rental. I really won't rent my properties for more than 30 days at a time. So I consider anything over 30 days a long-term rental, right? So the difference between long-term and short-term is you're going to look at 3 things: what your risk tolerance is, what your time allotment is, and direct or outsource. And what I mean by that is, how are you managing the property? Are you managing it yourself, or are you sending it to somebody else? When it comes to short-term or long-term rentals, a short-term rental is more risky because you have more chance of vacancy. You have more chance of the property being empty and you having carrying costs, right? It's more time set. It takes up more of your time. You're going to spend more time on a short-term rental, especially if it's a busy one, because you're going to be talking to guests pretty regularly. And management, this is really, really key, whether you have an Airbnb rental or you're thinking about taking one on. And this is, I've had some issues in the past with this, with other people who bought an Airbnb property and they didn't do this. I firmly believe that you have to manage that property yourself for at least the first 6 months. You cannot outsource management for at least 6 months, because it's very, very important that you know the ins and outs of the property. And the most important thing, and I'm going to drop my my Airbnb website in the chat, but the most important thing is, as a host, how you respond. So people can have problems all the time with your property, but if you respond empathetically and fast to what the problems are with what they're having, there's a very, very good chance you're never going to get a bad review. But if you respond in a manner that seems to be cold or not addressing their issues, they're going to get a bad chance you're going to get a bad review. So if it's not you answering, then you may see issues with that, as far as how, nobody's going to manage your property like you're going to manage it. And more than anything, I think you guys need to see what's going on with the property. So I always suggest that you manage it first yourself. I just dropped my company website in the chat, so you guys can look at some point. Those are all my current Airbnb properties that are listed on either Airbnb or VRBO. And this is just kind of more long-term, short-term, the pros and the cons, right? So for a long-term rental, there's always a high demand, especially now. Rent has risen to a crazy amount over the last few years. Currently, rent is at the highest amount it's ever been on average of people's income, meaning that right now rent is about 30% of the average income. It's costing people about 30% of their income. That's the highest it's ever been. So rent has been up. So long-term rentals is good for that mind. Legality. It's easier to find a property that meets all the legal rules when it's a long-term rental, not a short-term rental, and you have less vacancy. The cons of it is payments. If somebody doesn't pay, depending on what state you guys in, and I know a lot of people here are from New York, New Jersey, or Connecticut, it's very, very difficult to get people out. And tenants really, in those 3 states specifically, tenants really have most of the rights, right? So if somebody doesn't pay, it's almost impossible to get them out. I've never faced that once yet with a short-term rental where I couldn't get somebody out of the property in the last 3 or 4 years. Maintenance. I know you think a short-term rental property would be more maintenance, but there's 2 sides to that, right? A long-term rental, yes, you have to go there less, but it's also a lot more wear and tear on the property because somebody's there every single day. On a short-term rental, it's shorter stays, and after they leave, my cleaners are cleaning the property and tell me of anything that's broken immediately, so it gets fixed as we go. So I maintain that short-term rental properties stay maintained a little bit better than a long-term rental property. And you can only raise rent really between 3 and 5% a year, depending on what city you're in. So that's the cons. For short-term rentals, pros, I make between 2 and 3 times as much monthly on my short-term rentals than I do on my long-term rentals. So it's more work, it's more maintenance, but I'm making more money. So that's what I like about it. the payments are guaranteed. As soon as somebody books, there's cancellation requirements, just like a hotel has. They can't just cancel what you get in your payments, and damage control. I have handymen and cleaners that check the property almost after every single stay. So that helps. And that's not super expensive, by the way, and I'll speak about that. The cleaning, the person who's staying at your property pays for it. It's just a pass-through fee. So there's a cleaning fee on every Airbnb stay. So if I'm charging $200, I charge $200 to the customer, and it's a pass-through and it gets paid to my cleaner. So it's not costing me any money. The two most important people for any of your properties when you're doing this is you have to have a handyman. Unless you're handy, you're going to be fixing things, and you have to have good cleaners. They're going to be your eyes and ears. And handyman is super important if you're not close to the property, because you'll have little things that go wrong. The Wi-Fi goes down. For my house, they're mostly smart houses. So I have automated locks, I have automated thermostats, I have automated kind of everything. And if the battery dies on that and they don't know how to fix it, I need to have somebody close. So just like little things that can be answered immediately, you really need to have maintenance people for, or a handyman local, right? The cons of it is, like I said before, there's more expenses involved in it because you're doing more to maintain it. It's going to take up more of your time. I don't manage the bookings for my properties, but it's a daily thing. If you have a property that's busy, you're going to talk to people pretty frequently. Some people you won't talk to at all. Some people you talk to on check-in, on check-out, and that's it, especially if you have good instructions. But sometimes people stay, especially if it's a week or longer stay, they're going to have a lot of questions. Hey, we ran out of garbage bags. They treat it like it's a hotel. Like you basically become a hotel, concierge at that point. So could be a con. And regulations. More and more since I started to now, so I'm on about a 3 or 4 year journey with this at this point. The cities and towns have come up with more and more regulations over the last couple of years. Airbnb, the good and bad of Airbnb and VRBO is that all the financial information for every single house is public knowledge. So you can make good decisions on where you want to buy because you have public information on what they're making. But it also means that it's public knowledge for the cities. So they want their taxes and they want their permits. Permits for Airbnb properties, if the city has one, range anywhere between $300 and $500 for the year. So they're not expensive. Taxes, for the most part, when I have had to pay taxes on my Airbnb income to the city, I've never seen more than 3%. So they take 3% of your gross income. On some cities do, some cities don't, but I'm starting to see more and more of it. So it's something to kind of look out for. Does anybody have any questions so far that they want me to clarify on something? All right, I'm going to keep going then. If you do, just drop them in the chat. So how do you find the best property? Not just the best property for you. So I have 3 rules. I'm going to give you my 3 rules for buying Airbnb properties. And, this is for the things I've succeeded on in that side of the business, and the things I failed on, this is pretty much steadfast. The number 1 rule, especially for a vacation, and I want to preface this with this, actually. You're seeing a lot in the news. There's a lot of articles that have come out recently about Airbnb numbers are down, and there's a lot, vacancies are up. And, I want to give you the real numbers on that. There are more vacancies now than they were in 2021 and 2022, but there are a lot more properties on the market than there were in 2021 and 2022. So increased properties, increased vacancies. Overall, income on Airbnb type properties is up this year as much as it's ever been. So there's more, income is up and demand is up for those properties. But I like to buy my properties. This is a steadfast rule I stay by, in vacation areas, because preferably vacation areas that have been short-term rental properties, short-term rental areas in the past. So I'll give you an example. For those of you guys who know what the Poconos is, the Poconos has always been an Airbnb market, even before Airbnb existed. It's a market that was always an Airbnb market. So that's a market that is appealing to me because they have definitive short-term rental laws, and there's always a demand there, right? So that's a market that I can earmark as something that makes sense for Airbnb. I want to stay away from things that were possibly popular during COVID or the pandemic that may not be popular. So what's important about your property is that it's unique, or it's in an area where people rent a lot. If you're just one small property next to another small property, next to another small property, next to another small property, what sets your property apart from the rest if there's not stuff to do in the area? My properties that do the best are the properties that have a good experience that are outside just my property. And what I mean by that is that like I have a property on the Jersey Shore in Seabright, New Jersey. I'm down the block from the beach. You can park your car and go to the restaurants, to the bars, to the stuff for the kids. Everybody loves that property. And it's not because the property is beautiful. It's because they're not in the property that much. When they go down there, they're out doing stuff all day. So it's a good experience. So I like to buy properties with this experience that are outside just my property. Like you want to have things that draw people to the property that aren't just your property. So that's my rule number one. I want to buy in vacation areas where there's an experience that doesn't just consist of just my property being the only experience for the property. So that's one. The second thing is that you hear cap rates a lot. That's a big real estate investor term. I look at cap rates, but I really look on return on investment. What is my return on investment? On Airbnb properties, I want to make no less than 10% return on my investment and as much as 20% of my return on investment. So I'll give you guys an example, a dollar figure example. Let's say I invest $50,000 in a property to get a property up and running, right? That's my investment. And that includes my down payment, my closing costs, and furnishing my property. I want to make it the very least on that property, $5,000 per year at the least. I want to make as much as $10,000 a year on that property, which isn't a lot. That would be less than $1,000 a month. That's what I'm looking in profit. And on top of that, I want to get all of my initial investment. So I want that $50,000 back between 5 and 7 years, right? So those are the two steadfast rules I have for my properties that I want to make between 10 and 20% return on investment, and I want to have my money back in 5 to 7 years. That's what I'm looking for when I'm buying these. That seems to work for me the best. On a long-term or a multifamily investment, I'm okay with making 5 to 7% on my investment because it's a long-term investment. On something that I deem to be short-term and more risky, I want to make more on my investment. So those are the 3 rules I always try to follow when it comes to this. Anybody have any questions on that as far as return on investment or return on your initial investment or return on actually yearly on your investment? All right, I'm going to keep moving. All right. So these are the most important things you're going to look at when you look at short-term rentals, right? These, if you're going to take a picture of a screen, and by the way, if anybody wants this presentation, I'm going to drop my email in the chat, and you guys can send it to me. I'll send you guys a copy of the presentation. So I'm looking at these 3 things when I'm looking at a short-term rental property. Hold on a second. I'm sorry, guys. Go ahead. So that's a good question. Greg just asked, he's big into golf, if he bought in a golf community. So I have a couple of situations like that, Greg, where I have a property that's in a community where they have a golf course, they have tennis course, they have a water park and stuff like that. You have to find out up front with that. Most of the time, which I found, and every community is different, but most of the time what I found is that they can't use the amenities without paying a daily fee. That's most of the time the situation with that is that they're going to have to pay some kind of daily rate because you can only have a certain amount of guests per year use the course. So I would look into that first. What's the deal with visitors? Are they allowed to just use the course, or do they have to pay a daily rate to use the course? So that's the question I would ask first on that. So these are the 6 elements of, and Greg, I hope that answered the question. If not, I can speak to you afterwards. These are the 6 things that I look for in every single Airbnb property that's important, and I'll just define what the terms are. Number 1 is seasonality. So basically, seasonality is my property is very, very busy between January and May and doesn't rent at all in June, in July, and August. Depending on how much your property rents, it's either going to be a highly seasonal property where it just rents in the summer, or a property that rents all year round. So it's a tough thing to look at, but it's important for you to understand when your down months are going to be. So like the Jersey Shore, for instance, I'll use that again because it's an easy example. I am only really busy between May and I would say the middle of October. So the end of May and the middle of October. The rest of the year, it's really, really spotty. I get weekends, I get holidays that people book, but I have to make all my money in 4 or 5 months, which makes it a more risky property. So it's important that you guys understand how seasonal your property is so you can manage your funds. I make a lot of money in the summer, but I have to make sure I appropriate that money properly. So I have funds to get through the winter. So it's very, very important that going in how seasonal your property is. And by the way, when you put a property on Airbnb and VRBO platforms, you're not going to know everything about the property until you get to a 12-month cycle. You have to get to at least 1 year cycle before you understand your market. Now I have ways I can go back. Guys, how busy was I in February last year? I wasn't that busy. I was about here. So at least I have a track record. There's tons of websites that give you statistics. And Airbnb itself gives you statistics on what months you should be and what prices you should be charging per month. But you still have to get through a year to kind of really understand the property yourself. So it's important that you understand that and how seasonal your property is. What is the short-term rental demand for that area? Is it up? Is it down? You know, how is it done over the last couple of years? So it's important to understand. And this is something you should write down too. I use a website, and I think most people know about this website, but it's called airdna.co. I'll put that in the chat as well. Airdna.co will give you the exact numbers for so you have to go buy zip codes. It can get expensive, so you got to kind of know what you're going to buy. That's like $200 a zip code. But you go in, you pay for a zip code. It's going to tell you what the demand is for the area, what the occupancy rates for the area, what the average rates are for the area, and how investable. And they'll actually give you property examples. You can look up top properties and say, I'm looking to buy a 3-bedroom property. This is the best 3-bedroom property in the zip code. That's my competition. So that's how I look at properties. When I'm buying properties, I go look at other top properties in the area and look at what my competition is to kind of see where I'm going to end up. So they'll tell you what short-term rental demand is. They'll tell you what the occupancy rates are. Whenever I'm buying a property, to be safe, I usually base my numbers, my break-even numbers, and this is important, on renting the property about 35% of the year. So 35% of the year would essentially be Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So if I can break even renting it 35% of the year, I consider that property a safe investment. If I can't, like Seabright's not going to rent 35% of the year, so it's highly seasonal. So I just have to really know what my numbers are so I can get to the property and do the right thing. That property only really rents, it probably rents between 35 and 40% of the year because I get other weekends, but that property is seasonal. I have other properties that are rented 60 to 70%, but they get less per day. So it's important to understand what your occupancy rates are. But when I'm buying a property for investment purposes, I usually use between 35 and 40% that the property is going to be occupied. And then I look at what I think my average daily rate is going to be. So this stuff is easier to find. And again, AirDNA has it, but you can literally go on Airbnb and VRBO and look at a property that's similar to what you're looking to buy and see what they're charging and see how many times it's been booked. So you can figure out average daily rates. Airbnb puts out a report every single year. Not everybody gets it, but they put out a report every single year on market growth. When I look at they put out a list a couple of weeks ago. When I look at where the market growth was, it's a tricky list because you can look at something like a market could have grown a lot, but the average revenue for that market is only about $20,000, which means that it's renting for less than $2,000 a month. So that's not a market I want to be in. So that number can be tricky, but you're looking for areas that are growing and they're not flooded with Airbnb properties because it becomes harder to compete. And I'll give you a couple examples. Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville, Tennessee is probably the number one Airbnb property capital of the world. If you go look, there's probably between 7,000 and 8,000 Airbnb properties there. So much so that they've now they're capping it. And if you don't have a license, you can't get a new license. The problem in an area like that is that, yes, it's very popular with the Airbnb, but it's very competitive too. So your prices get chopped down. So I like to find properties that are in a sweet spot, that they're not flooded with Airbnbs, but they're Airbnb friendly and where I can get a decent rate. I have 3 properties now in an area called Ocala in Florida. Ocala really is horse country. There's a big equestrian center there, but there's not a lot of Airbnb properties. That property rents between 9 and 10 months of the year. And it was not an expensive, they weren't expensive buys. I bought all the properties between $300,000 and $400,000. And one of the property does about $90,000 a year in gross income, and the other 2 do between $60,000 and $70,000 in gross income. My average payment on my mortgages on the properties are about $1,600 because taxes are very, very cheap there. So those properties are very, very profitable. But it's because I found an area. My properties are down in they're buying historic downtown, walking distance, so that you can walk to the bars and the restaurants. And I'm about a 15-minute drive from where all the horse people want to be for their show horses and for jumping horses and stuff like that. So I'm close enough to an attraction and I'm in walking distance from the stuff they want to do at night. That was kind of something I found the sweet spot on. Those are great areas to find. And that's where you're looking for market growth in an area like that. That's not overpopulated, but that has attractions to it. So when I look for market growth, I look for market growth like that. The last thing I'm looking at is regulation. This has been mostly bad for me, regulation. I've had before I buy any properties now, the first thing I do, and the first thing you always should do, is I call local municipalities, whatever the local municipal government is, and I say, hey, what are your short-term rental laws? So they're going to tell you right off the bat, this is what it is. The places that scare me the most are the places that don't have any short-term rental laws. Back to Seabright, New Jersey. Seabright, New Jersey had no rental laws at all. The people in the town kind of got banded together and complained, and now they put strict rental laws in this year where you have to rent for the minimum of 7 days at a time. You can't rent less than 7 days, which can be painful. You have to get a short-term rental permit, which is $500. They're charging a 3% tax, and I now have to go into a system and enter every guest that's checking in. It's still a good property, but it's not as good as the property was before. So that was a short-term rental law that came into place 2 years after I bought the property that kind of hamstrung me. So it's important to know what the short-term rental laws are. And if there's no short-term rental laws, I would just be careful about buying there without knowing kind of what the general feeling is about short-term rental laws. And I'll give you another example. I have a property in Jersey City. It's a two-family property. I was renting one unit, and I was long-term, and I was using the bottom unit for a short-term rental. What I didn't know before I bought the property is that my next-door neighbor was not a big fan of Airbnb, and she had signs in front of a house before I moved it that said, "Stop Airbnb in Jersey City." So these are things I never would have known. But long story short is I had one guest that checked in, and this was another lesson. They were able to directly book my property without me checking anything about them. Now I have it set up so you can't directly book my properties. You have to have a valid ID. You have to be at least 25 years old, and you have to have at least one review. I set that criteria on Airbnb to protect myself. I didn't have that before I had this problem. So my rule is 25 years of age, valid ID, and at least one Airbnb review, or you can't rent my properties. So I had this guest rent. They went out that night. They came back a little tipsy. They were being loud outside. They knocked on my neighbor's door at like 3 o'clock in the morning. So I got a call at 8 o'clock in the morning. I got a text from her, very upset, which was understandable. Said, I'll handle it right now. I called the guest. I told them they had to leave. I called her back within 45 minutes and said, hey, this is what I did. I'm sorry that happened. This is what I'm doing. I'm going to go forward so it never happens again. I put everything in place. What I didn't know in that 45 minutes between when I told her I was going to handle it and I handled it, she called the mayor's office. I ended up with a fire inspector and about $4,000 in fines for like various things. So it was a mess because the first mistake I made is I didn't have a rule so people couldn't directly book my property. The second thing I had in place was that I didn't know my neighbor well enough. And when it comes to short-term rental properties, it's really, really important. What I do now before I buy every single property is I knock on my neighbor's door before I close. And I ask the question. It's like, hey, this is going to be a short-term rental property. Do you have any issues with that? Is there anything I could do to make you feel better about it? I want to know my neighbors, because if it's something that they're completely against, that's not a property for me. They're there every single day. I'm only there once in a while. It could be a problem. And it's worked out for me. On 2 of my properties, my neighbors are my cleaners and my handymen. So in some situations, it's really worked to my benefit. So I have somebody who watches the house now 24/7 for me, and I pay them to clean the house. But in other situations, it's been really detrimental. So I think it's really, really important that you know the regulations. And on top of that, you know your neighbors, if that makes sense. So let's see if I answer the chat. All right, guys. And if you have any questions, just let me know. If not, I'm going to keep going. But this is the criteria, essentially, what I look for in every single property to make sure I'm buying the right property. Financing, things to know before financing. So there's a few ways to buy a short-term rental property, and you just kind of know how you're going to do it. A little loophole in this is you can buy your first short-term rental property as a second home. As a second home, you can buy it with as little as 10% down, which is great. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are the two major conventional lending agencies, You're allowed to rent a property, a second home property, part of the year. You just can't rent it long term. So you can't buy a second home and rent it for 12 months, but you can rent it for 30 days or less. So that's how I would suggest buying your first property. There are even some programs you can get into a second home with as little as 5% down. So that's the best way to buy it, right? And then you're allowed to rent it. It's legal to rent it at that point. So that's the first part. If you're buying it solely as an investment and it's going to be an investment property, you're going to, in most cases, have to put down at least 15%. And you can still finance that through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. You put down 15%. If you need to qualify that property off Airbnb income on the property, meaning when you usually buy a property and you have to get a mortgage, you can use what's considered market rent, so the average rent in the area, as income for that property. But in some cases, the market or the average rent for that area isn't enough to qualify you for the property, but the Airbnb income would be. I have a couple of properties that I bought that were, the market rent was $1,000 a month and the Airbnb income was $5,000 a month. So I needed to qualify off the Airbnb income. If there are loans available and we offer them as a mortgage company, but if you're going to buy a property where you need to use Airbnb income for the property or potential Airbnb income for the property, you're going to have to put at least 20% down. I'm at the point now where I'm buying all these Airbnb properties under LLCs for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that LLC loans, you don't have to show income on. So it's not a million tax returns on every single property. It's going to be qualified based off the rent from the property. The rates are a little bit higher, but I'm more protected as an LLC for insurance purposes. So if somebody wants to sue me or they want to sue me for the property because there was an accident at the property, outside of insurance, an LLC protects me in that situation a lot better than my personal assets, because if they sue me, they can only sue that LLC. They can't sue me as a person, and knock on wood, that's never happened to me before. But in case, I'm more protected as an LLC than I would be as a person owning an Airbnb. So those are the three type of ways you can really buy a property. You know, at some point, I bought my first as a second home. I bought my second property as a multifamily investment property that I rented one unit from. And then I really had to start buying those properties as pure investments or what we call DSCR loans, which are the loans that are done under LLCs, and those are debt service loans. And again, those are available programs, and everybody wants more information on that, we can get it to you. But those are really the three ways that you can buy these properties. All right. So do we have, I'm getting towards the end of the presentation. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask about anything? Markets that they should be buying in, financing, what you should be looking for income, what my average income is on these properties? Anything anybody wants to ask that I haven't volunteered already? And if you want, I can unmute you. You don't have to type. Just raise your hand or unmute yourself.
I have a question.
Okay.
Is there any softwares that you use like for booking?
Yeah, so I use one platform that manages every single. So again, we rent on Airbnb, VRBO, Booking.com, Expedia, PeerSpace, and PeerSpace is renting your home for photo shoots, for office meetings, for events. That's what PeerSpace is, and I've rented mine for photo shoots. And the other one we use is Furnish Finders. Furnish Finders is renting your home to doctors and nurses. It's only doctors and nurses, which are great renters, by the way, because they're contracted and you get the money from who's paying for it. They don't pay for it themselves, and it's basically guaranteed. But I use Guesty, Guesty, to manage my properties. And whenever it books on one platform, Guesty blocks it on every single platform, and then it gives me reports. So it's important that you have something like that, because somebody may book on Airbnb and it's still available on VRBO, and then you get double bookings and then you have to cancel. So you need a software that's going to manage cross-platform. I use Guesty. There's other platforms, but I use Guesty to manage all those services.
Perfect. Thank you.
Gianna, did you have a question?
Do you have any tips for international properties?
Just a good question. I'm building in Dominican Republic right now, in a resort. You know, like anything else, like I want to know if there's any kind of local restrictions against that stuff. I like international properties. The properties that I'm building are within a resort, so the resort's going to manage the property for me, which is even better. But it just comes down to the same things. I own a lot of property out of state. It's just a matter of what does your help look like? So even out of the country, it's like, is it easy to get local handyman? Is it easy to get local cleaners? As far as the bookings go, you're going to be renting to mostly people from either here or Canada or Europe, and those depending on what you're buying. It's easy to manage that way. You know, I think the key to managing everywhere is to make your house as accessible as you can through technology. So smart thermostats, smart cameras on the front and back of the house. I use Alexa in all my houses, like things that you can help you manage a property without you being there. And the biggest thing is just to have somebody locally that can go back and forth to the house. Was there a certain market that you wanted to look at?
Dominican Republic.
Yeah. So I think Dominican Republic is a really good market right now. It just depends on where. Like I'm building it in La Romana. It's a new resort there. It was not expensive either. It's a new resort there that's going to be, it's going to be the only PGA golf course in Dominican Republic. So the lot cost me about $70,000, and it's cost me about $120,000 to build a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom townhouse with a pool and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't expensive, but I know like Punta Cana and Capacana are expensive. So I think it just depends on where you want to go. You just have to make sure. And by the way, Gianni, the information on those places is available. You can pull the numbers in those places. But I like the international market, just depending on where. There's something that came out recently, and I could probably find the article, but if you Google it, you can find it. Like the cities where the most digital nomads are going, like people are traveling for Airbnb. And Dominican Republic was on there. Medellin was on it in Colombia, Puerto Rico, Portugal. There were like 5 or 6 cities that people are really using Airbnbs at a high level.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hey, Denise, I saw you have a question in the chat. I want to be able to know. So, two things, Denise. They get, as soon as they book, they get the rules. So it automatically goes to them. I haven't set it automated. So as soon as they book, they get the house rules. So they know there's a pet fee. If you have more people, this is not okay. And then the day of the booking, they get check-in instructions. And in the check-in instruction, it has the rules again. So they get it twice from me.
Are there places you would recommend buying at this current point in the market, and also the places you would absolutely avoid?
Yeah. So there's a couple of places I'm looking at now. There's a couple of trends that I'm looking at that I like. One trend that I really, really like a lot is college towns. And not for college students. I like college towns for parents, alumni, and people who are visiting. I've seen a trend where those towns have been very, very high income, as long as the rules allow for it. So I like college towns. I like vacation towns still. I would avoid any. I got kind of beat up on this a little bit. I bought a property based off of kind of a 2 or 3 year average during COVID, and the property's income was like 3 times as high as normal during COVID than it was after COVID. During COVID, it was a 7-day to 30-day town. After COVID, it was a 3-day town. So I probably, I had to kind of know that. So I would avoid that for sure. I would avoid anything that has a local movement where they don't like Airbnb. And you can really find that out through realtors, local realtors. Besides that, Florida was a little bit flooded last year with Airbnb properties. Like for instance, I have a property in Miami that was doing very well last year, and it's not doing as well this year because I think there was just too many people that came into the market. So any place that was very, very heavy, why people couldn't travel out of the country, is someplace I would really take a close look at before I bought that. That's the stuff that I'm kind of avoiding at this point. One of my golden rules with these properties, Chris, is any property that I would like to stay at myself is something that I'm interested in buying. Property that doesn't have a good feel and I'm not looking to stay there, I try to stay away from, because if you're having a good experience there, chances are that somebody else is going to have some kind of good experience there. So I try to stay away from anything that I wouldn't want to stay at myself. I've looked at properties in areas that are supposed to be good rental areas. And then I went to the properties and I'm like, this really isn't, it's not private. It's not nice. The people across the street have cars on their lawns. Like this isn't a place somebody's going to want to visit for vacation. So, I try to really think of it along those lines. And that's why I like vacation areas the best, because they usually have the most things to do around the areas. Ricardo, I see that you're asking me, and Chris, did that answer your question as much as I could?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Ricardo asked if any tools that you use to perform market analysis of potential property. Yeah, I mean, I use AirDNA mostly. Ricardo, AirDNA is going to give you the occupancy rate for the area, the average rate that people are getting per houses, and more importantly, I want to look at specific houses and see how much they made. So, like, if I go look at my property, and I know it works because if I look at my properties on AirDNA, it has the exact number that of income I got from Airbnb and VRBO. Those are the two numbers it pulls. So I can really go tell, like, if I'm going to rent my 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom property in North Carolina, in this town, on this block, this person's going to be my competition. Is my house nicer than that house? Is it the same? Is there anything unique about my product compared to everything else? So AirDNA is real. There's the other sites, but AirDNA I found to have the most, statistical integrity. So that's the site I've been using mostly. Anybody else? Don't be shy. And Chris, also on properties, it is like an ongoing thing. Properties that I thought were good towns last year, I've changed. A lot of the properties that are doing well again. So there was a huge push into like remote mountainous areas, right? There was during COVID, that's where everyone wanted to be. And the income on those properties like skyrocketed, and then it plummeted when COVID was over. But now what I'm seeing is a lot of those areas are on the comeback again. Like the Catskills was an area that everybody went to, and then Catskills put on these regulations, and Woodstock was another area, and they put on these regulations, and people stopped going there. But I have a property on Greenwood Lake, and I'm on the New Jersey side, but it's like a modern cabin. Like I bought it for $200,000. I put about $100,000 into it, and we made it into like a modern cabin. It's like a 3 or 4 bedroom property used. People from the city, it's close enough to the city where they can take a bus there. They can take a bus into Warwick. They like to go there for the experience in in nature for the weekend. Those towns seem to do very, very well all year round, especially if they're by any kinds of lakes.
I have a question.
Sure.
So it's legal you have video recorded in your property?
Just outside.
Only outside?
I have it in the front of the house and the back of the house. That's it. You can't have cameras inside anywhere, obviously. So,
okay.
I have Ring doorbells on every single property, and I'll have a camera in the front and a camera in the back, but that's about it. And that's important, especially if you're not there, because like, for instance, it snowed yesterday. I had to check my properties to see if I needed snow removal in a lot of those properties. So it's important just so you can manage the property if you're not close by. But yeah, just outside I have them.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Wait, I think we have one more.
So I have a question about, you said college town.
Yes.
Okay, so you say it's supposed to rent only for people 25 and older?
Correct, yeah.
So how do you wanna be a college town, rent property for kids? There's maybe 18.
So I don't want to rent to the kids. That's the thing. I want to rent to visitors. So I'll give you an example.
Okay.
There's a good town on Airbnb based off the numbers. It's called State College. It's the college that Penn State is in Pennsylvania. And the town is actually called State College. That town has got really, really good numbers. It gets a ton of people coming back for football games and alumni events and to visit their kids. And those are the people I want. And the good thing about those properties is that they tend to be 12-month rentals. Like they rent all year round. Maybe you'll have August will be a down month, but like they rent 10 or 11 months out of the year. So I want to have those houses where I don't want to rent it to kids because I don't want parties. But I want to rent to people who are coming to visit. So those I like those towns for that reason. I want to have it for the visitors because most of the time those people come, they want to have space. They want to be able to have their car. They want to be, and here's the thing too. I'm pet friendly. Some people don't want to be. I charge a pet fee. I charge $150 per pet, but I'm pet friendly because a lot of times people are traveling to these houses because they want to bring their pets with them. So
Yeah.
I have a pet fee and I have an agreement that if they cause any damage, they have to pay for it, but I am very pet friendly. So in those towns, people want to bring their dogs. They want the kids to come over so they can cook. So like it really works in those towns. That's why I like that strategy.
Okay.
Question about balancing your portfolio. So do you
Sure.
try to put, you have one property that rents extremely well in the wintertime, but not so well in the summer and vice versa? Do you try to have a little bit of a few of each of those?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I've tried to diversify so that one property is covering the other one in a lot of months, and like I have that now. I have a property in the Jersey Shore. I have a property in North Carolina on a place called Ocean Isle. It's by Myrtle Beach. It's a beach community, but it's cold there right now. So those properties are really doing nothing. But mostly with that stuff, Chris, I'm trying to make sure that that property individually is got enough reserves to get it through the slow months. So I have tried to balance, but I really try to mostly upfront analyze that property on its own merit. Because you never know, obviously. And like this year, there was hurricanes this year. I had 4 properties hit by hurricanes, which is not fun, right? I had small repairs, nothing crazy. And I'll caution anybody that's looking to buy in the state of Florida. Florida is not a great state to buy in right now because of the insurance problem. There's basically an a homeowner's insurance crisis in Florida right now, that you can't get insurance on investment properties or second homes. And if you do, you're going to pay 30 to 40% higher than you would pay in any other state. So right now, most of the insurance properties and the insurance policies in Florida are going through state-run insurance companies, and they have high premiums. It's supposedly being addressed this year. There's like some legislation that's going to address it, but I have properties that got hit by hurricanes down there. There wasn't a lot of damage, but I couldn't even put it in the claim because if I put in the claim, they were going to drop me. So I wouldn't suggest that to anybody right now. Unless it's a condo where you have some maintenance from the condo, then you're better off. But I have houses there. So, some places I would avoid for those reasons. But I try to, analyze each property on its own merit.
I have a question. Hi, Mr. Ralph.
Hey, Jill.
The taxes. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
As far as what they're charging?
Yes.
Yeah. So like for instance, Seabright takes 3% of whatever my income is for the month. So if I'm so they're going to take 3%, like a sales tax. They take 3% right off the top, and they know the numbers because they're reported live. So I have to pay them basically monthly through their portal, 3%. That I have 1, 2, 3 markets that are charging me that at this point. So I've never paid more than 3%, but it's 3% that you pay it monthly, based on how much income you made that month. So if you made $1,000, if you made 0, there is no tax. But if you made $10,000, you're going to pay the 3%. It's whenever you're making. Sam, yes, everybody will get an email with this recording. Kayla, I saw you asked, do you think there's value in promoting your properties on social media, Instagram page of each of them? I think there's a lot of value in repeat bookings. So yes, we do some business through our social media pages. Because we're booking, when you have testimonials on social media and stuff like that, it really, really helps. But the thing that's going to help you guys the most is your reviews on Airbnb and VRBO. People read reviews. It's very, very important that you don't get bad reviews. I've sacrificed money. I've sacrificed a lot of stuff to avoid bad reviews. If I had a guest, I can tell you guys 1,000 stories. I won't, but I'll give you an example. I had a guest that was at one of my houses last week. We have, I don't know if everybody ever seen Hotel Collection. It's like a diffuser that puts scents in the air. They came in the house and it smells like a hotel. Like they came in the house and they smelt that. So they assumed that we were trying to disguise a smoke smell. So nobody's ever smoked in the house. You can't smoke in the house, so there's fines for it. And I've never smelled smoke there, but they were convinced that we were trying to disguise smoke. So the person went as far as going outside and taking pictures of cigarette butts in the rocks outside the house. So, it was a little bit of back and forth. And then I got the person on the phone and said, look, nobody's ever been allowed to smoke in the house. I could have my cleaner come by today to look at the house to make sure that nothing's going on. It ended up being a pleasant conversation. And we came to an amicable resolution where I gave them a little bit of discount because they weren't happy with the smell in the house and they didn't write a review. But you're almost going to have to overly be sympathetic to people in those situations because a bad review can completely ruin your house. You don't want bad reviews on the houses. So that's most important, Caleb, more than social media. Anybody else? All right, guys, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to send out the presentation and I'm going to send out the recording of this. It'll go to everybody that was on the call. Anybody that signed up, they will get the recording. Caleb put my email in there. If you guys want to speak to me directly, you have it. My website's there to go check it out. You can go check out our Airbnb profiles. And if anybody has any questions, let me know. Hope everybody enjoyed it. Thank you guys for coming on. And we'll have some more stuff as far as these courses on Meetup. If you're interested, if you join the group, you'll see some more stuff, some more advanced stuff with it. But thank you everybody for coming. And if I can help anymore, let me know.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.